What is up, guys? Welcome to this new video. Today we're going to talk about a really fascinating and awesome brain area, which is the cerebellum. Okay, so it's this really small little green brain area right here. And we're going to talk about why is it really important to actually have extremely good cerebellar skills. We're going to talk about the different functional areas of the cerebellum, because believe it or not, the cerebellum, we have one on the left side, one on the right side. The cerebellum in it of itself actually has a lot of different areas that we can focus on and that we can actually train and improve. And we're going to dive into that. And then last but not least, I'm going to share two really awesome drills with you that you can use to actually challenge and train your cerebellum. Okay, so let's get into it. All right, so if you look at the brain itself, the cerebellum actually doesn't take up a lot of space, okay? So it takes up only around like 10% of the total volume of brain size. However, the cerebellum actually houses around 50% of the total amount of neurons in the brain, okay? Which makes the cerebellum actually a very densely packed brain area with a lot of different functions, okay? And the fascinating thing for me when I do my research, which is something that I almost do every single day, and you go to PubMed and you do some research on the cerebellum, it seems like every month they discover a new function of the cerebellum that we didn't know of in the past, okay? So decades ago, they thought the cerebellum is primarily involved in coordination of movement, which is, still one of the primary functions of the cerebellum. However, now they're finding that the cerebellum is actually involved in a lot more, okay? So especially non-movement related things, like for example, like emotions, like the cerebellum is also involved in like cognition. Like there's so many things that the cerebellum is involved in that we probably still don't know about. But that's why it's actually so important to view the cerebellum as a brain area that has a lot of effects on our whole body, and especially when it comes, of course, to movement and mobility. So let's first start talking about the three primary functions of the cerebellum. And I actually want to stick with movement here because, like we get into all of the other things that the cerebellum does, it gets quite complicated. But when we look at movement, the cerebellum actually is involved in three primary things, okay? Which is number one, it's really important for muscle tone, okay? So actually for regulating muscle tone. And if you've been following me, I've been talking about that a lot, that the mobility or flexibility that we present with has very little to do with actually the length of your muscle tissue, but has actually all to do with your muscle tone, which is something that the brain controls and that the brain kind of governs. And the cerebellum is one of the key brain areas here that actually controls muscle tension and muscle tone, okay? And let's say you have an individual that can't touch their toes. It's usually because the cerebellum, in that case, just doesn't allow for that range of motion to happen, okay? So that just means that, for example, the tone in the specific muscle, let's say, for example, the hamstrings, just increases and it doesn't decrease because the cerebellum doesn't want you to go and touch your toes, okay? So again, this is something that we just have to understand when we look at movement through a neural lens, that muscle tone is something that is really critical. And again, the cerebellum is one of the primary brain areas involved here in actually regulating that muscle tone, okay? So that's number one. Number two, the cerebellum is also really important for proprioception and balance, okay? And the interesting thing here is that we have a specific area of the cerebellum, which is called the vestibulocerebellum. We're going to talk about that in just a second. And the vestibulocerebellum, as the name applies, goes hand in hand with our vestibular system, okay? And our vestibular system is our body's own balancing system, which sits in our inner ear, and it's deeply connected with our cerebellum and actually regulating balance and equilibrium, okay? So that's also really important. Then proprioception at the same time. So proprioception, if you don't know what that is, proprioception is basically the ability to know where we are in space when we don't have visual input. So let's say, for example, you close your eyes, you can do this at home, and you move your right index finger, you kind of still know where that finger is in space. So that's proprioception. And some of the best movers in the world, so I've worked with some really, really high level athletes, what I found was that they actually have extremely high quality proprioception. Okay, so they have extremely good proprioceptive skills that they can use to actually coordinate their movement without actually having to think about it that much, which is actually something that good proprioception allows you to do. Okay, so we have muscle tone, we have balance and proprioception, and then number 3, coordination. Okay, so the cerebellum is really important for coordinating our motor output. So let's say I'm doing a circle with my right hand. The cerebellum actually fine-tunes that movement and makes sure that it's actually a circle and not a square. Okay, so the cerebellum is also really important for coordination. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the different areas of the cerebellum. Okay, and I specifically want to talk about the functional areas here of the cerebellum because it gets really complicated when we talk about all the other zones of the cerebellum. So we have, for example, like the lateral zone, the paravermal zone, we have the vermis. So like we have a lot of different areas of the cerebellum itself. However, I want to focus on 3 primary areas here that are also connected with the 3 functions that we just talked about, okay? Which is number 1, the vestibulocerebellum, which I already had mentioned, okay? So the vestibulocerebellum is the specific area of the cerebellum that is connected with our vestibular system and controls balance, okay? Then number 2, we have the spinocerebellum, which is really important for proprioception. And then number 3, our cerebrocerebellum, which is really important for coordination of movements. And again, this is a very simplified way of looking at the cerebellum, but it just allows you to understand a little bit more how different parts of the cerebellum control different outputs that we actually want to improve. Okay, and in practice, what I do with my clients and my athletes is that I actually have specific assessments and screening tools that I can use to actually look at how well are, for example, the spinocerebellar skills or the vestibulocerebellar skills or the cerebrocerebellar skills, because that actually allows me to be more specific with some of the approaches that I can use as a neurotraining coach to actually train the cerebellum and optimize movement, optimize performance, and also just optimize general health. So as you can see, the cerebellum, it's small, but it has a lot to offer. And again, like the coolest thing with the cerebellum is that we can actually train it, we can improve it. And when we look at some of the research on the cerebellum, and also something that I've discovered in my practice doing this for a lot of years now, is that there are certain individuals that actually present with really, really good cerebellar skills. So I would say like the 2 primary people that I have worked with that have exceptional cerebellar skills, especially when it comes to coordination, is dancers and musicians. So like, for example, I've worked with like drummers in the past. And of course, for them, like just being able to coordinate all these different movements is really, demanding high quality cerebellar skills. But then at the same time, dancers, the same thing, okay? And the cool thing here is that when you look at these individuals, it just shows you that when you actually try to improve cerebellum function, we can do that, again, with all of the different things that we just talked about. We could talk about improving muscle tone. We could talk about improving coordination, talk about balance, proprioception, which, again, are extremely important skills that we need as human beings and specifically as athletes. But also, let's say you're just tight all the time and you just have a lot of tension in your muscles and you've been, trying to stretch and you've been trying to do all of these things and nothing really works. The cerebellum here actually offers oftentimes a really, really good solution to focus on, because that's something that I have noticed that not a lot of movement practitioners out there actually have this neural lens. Okay, so they have this view of, okay, like we have a tight muscle and we need to like loosen that muscle. We need to, I don't know, like try to get rid of the tightness of the muscle, but they don't really like have that neuro view of actually understanding why is that muscle tight. Okay, so that's just something that is really important to know here. All right, so if we know that the cerebellum is really important for movement, if we know that we can actually train and improve the cerebellum by actually using neuroplasticity, what can we do? Like, what are some of the drills that I can recommend here? And one of the coolest ones that I just want to quickly share with you, and also one of the most challenging drills, is when you actually try to coordinate both sides of your body at the same time. Okay, so in practice, I go after, like we have one cerebellum on the left, one on the right. Again, we have all these different functional areas. So like in practice, what I do is I actually look left versus right, and then I go to work with the specific areas. But what I want to show you in this quick video, in this quick training, is actually how you can just upregulate and like stimulate both parts, so like both sides of your cerebellum, the left side and the right side. Okay. And the way we can do this is you can do a figure eight, like a lying figure eight with your right hand. And you can do this at home. And then while you do this, you do a circle with your other hand. Okay? And see if you can do this. Because what I found is that most people that try and do this, they actually struggle really hard. Okay? You can also switch. So you can do the figure eight here. You already can do it. And then a circle on the other hand. Okay? And again, this is not a sign. Like, let's say you're doing this and you figure out you can't do it. That's not a sign that your cerebellum is broken. It's just a sign that it might need some training and you can optimize it. And again, it's something that I've seen with some of the highest level athletes. Like, they might have, good athletic skills, good cognitive skills, but oftentimes like these things are really challenging also for like really elite athletes. And again, that's something that is really cool because we can actually train the cerebellum to become better at these things. Because if you, let's say, ask a dancer to do this, they most of the times can do it. Okay, so like you need more tools in your toolbox to actually like challenge them. Okay, so this is one really cool exercise that I can show you. Another one that you can do is, and you've probably done this if you got pulled over by the police, it's kind of like this finger to nose test. Okay, and you can also do this, for example, in like a one leg stance. Okay, so you're also like basically like targeting more of like the balance and proprioception side of things. But I'm just going to show it to you like this. So you're going to close your eyes, and then you're trying to bring your fingers, so like each finger at a time, to the tip of your nose. Okay, while you have your eyes closed. All right. So some of you might actually struggle with that being sober. Okay. Of course, like once you drink, what actually happens is that when you drink, it actually affects the cerebellum. This is why they're actually using this test. So it's actually pretty cool that they're using neurology to actually test the cerebellum at this given point. It's a very effective test, but it's a great training tool as well. Okay, so again, you can use this, for example, also like with a one leg stance or like a tandem stance to get a little bit more of that balance component involved. But that actually requires you to have really, really good proprioception. So like you need to know where is your nose in space and where are your different fingers in space to actually touch your nose. Okay, so I hope this was helpful. I hope the drills were insightful, and it shows you that sometimes some of the most basic things are actually really hard for our brain to do. Like a figure eight here and a circle here shouldn't be that hard, but it just shows you, hey, like we can actually improve and train our brain. And again, this can have so many effects on different other areas that you might want to improve. Again, like muscle tension, coordination, balance, like all of these things are controlled by the cerebellum. And if you really optimize this beautiful brain area, we can see a lot of benefits further down the line. And if you like this video and if you want to learn even more, you can check out our upcoming 2-day neurotraining online seminar. We're going to talk a lot more in depth about the cerebellum. I'm going to share some of my favorite assessment tools for the cerebellum for your toolbox. Specifically if you're a coach, if you're a therapist, or also if you're just a health enthusiast. I think it's really important to know more about the brain and specifically the cerebellum. So if you want to learn more, definitely check that one out. And yeah, guys, with that said, I see you in the next video, and make sure to actually train that cerebellum.